In this video, I will be making a giant belt sander from an old treadmill. And the reason that I have this old treadmill is because we got a new one, and this old one, the control panel on it, broke, the buttons didn't work anymore, and the motor was, all burnt out, so basically nothing on it worked. And so my parents were just going to throw it out, but I thought I could use it for something. And so here I am, the first thing I had to do was just get rid of all the stuff that I didn't need, which was just about everything on the treadmill except for the actual belt. Now that I have just the belt, I'm gonna mount in a new motor, and I pick up a lot of old motors from garage sales and stuff, so I just grabbed a random motor from the other garage and just mounted it in, but I ended up replacing the one that you're seeing me mount in right here with a more powerful one. This one is only a 1/6 of a horsepower, and that was not strong enough, and you'll see in later shots that I have replaced it with a full horsepower motor, which worked really well. Now, at this point, I was getting really sick of just working on my hands and knees, so I decided I'd start working on the stand for this sander, and I'm going to be using some edge-glued pine my dad had left over from one of his projects to do this. So I started by cutting off a section of the panel to make the legs of the stand, and I took that section over to the table saw to cut into 2-inch strips. And this panel of edge-glued pine is only an inch thick, so I actually had to cut 8 of those 2-inch strips, and then I glued those together to make the 4 2x2-inch legs. And once the glue is dried, I took the legs over to the miter saw and I cut the ends off at 10 degrees. And I did this because I wanted the legs to go out at an angle. I just thought that would look nice. I'm gonna have a apron that connects all these legs together, and to joint the legs to the apron, I'm gonna make some sliding dovetail joints, which is something I've never done before. And for this to work, I need to cut some slots in the legs to hold the sliding dovetails, and I need a tool that bevels in both directions to do this, and my table saw only tilts in one direction, but my new miter saw tilts in both, which is why I'm using my miter saw and this jig I made to remove most of the waste for these sliding dovetail joints, and then I will use a chisel to finish cutting those. Okay, so I made this quick little tapering jig so I can taper each of the legs. Last thing I have to do to finish off these legs is cut a notch near the bottom of each leg, and these notches are going to hold the leg supports that I'll make later. And that's it. That's all I have to do for the legs. I can set those aside, and I'm going to start working on making the apron pieces that'll connect the legs. Since the legs are angled outwards, that means that the apron also has to be angled outwards. So I cut the 2 longer sides of the apron at 10 degrees, and the 2 shorter sides are cut square. Next, I needed to make the sliding dovetails on the ends of each of the apron pieces, and to do that I used a jig to hold the piece upright as I fed it through the saw at 10 degrees. And I finished cutting the sliding dovetails with a handsaw. That is it for the apron, so I can set those pieces aside with the legs. And the last element of this stand that I need to make is the leg supports. And I'm going to have two shorter leg supports that connect the legs on the shorter sides. And then I'm going to have one really long support beam that runs the entire length of the stand. So first I'm going to make the two shorter supports. And once I have those pieces cut to length, I can bring those over to the table saw, and I'm going to cut some slots down the middle of each piece for the sliding dovetails, which will hold the longer support beam. Also, just another thing I'm going to do just to make this stand look a little bit nicer, I'm going to cut a curve on these two shorter leg supports, and I did that just using the bandsaw, and I cleaned that up using my old compass plane, which is a tool that I almost never use, but if you're an older subscriber, I made a video on that like a really long time ago, and I was talking about in that video how I couldn't get this to work properly, and then I got some pointers from somebody in the comments, and now it works really well, so thanks to that guy. Now for the longer leg support, again, since the legs are slanted in that direction, I have to cut the ends of this piece off at that same 10-degree angle. Now I just need to cut the sliding dovetails on the ends of this piece, and I wanted to use the table saw jig for this like I did with the other pieces, but this piece was just way too long, so that wouldn't have worked, so I had to just hand cut these sliding dovetails, which did not take much longer, and I'm actually pretty glad that I did because I ended up getting a much tighter fit, which is really good for this piece because this beam here is going to handle most of the stress of the stand, so it's probably a good thing that I ended up having to hand cut these. And that's it. I have all my pieces done for the stand, and now I just have to put them together. I am really happy with the way that these sliding dovetails came out. Like I said, this is my first time doing something like this, and this is just a stand for the shop, so I could have really just, screwed something together, but I decided I'd try something different, and then if it didn't work out, then it wouldn't really matter that much, but this actually worked out pretty well. I really like these. Now back to the treadmill. I lifted the treadmill onto its new stand, and now to actually make it a sander, I need a sanding belt, and I'm not going to buy one. I'd probably need something custom, and it would cost me a lot of money. So instead, I set out a big sheet of craft paper, and I just tried out all sorts of adhesives, and I need something strong but kind of flexible, so it wouldn't crack. And I tried out this really expensive, high-strength spray adhesive that I thought was going to work. I tried out epoxy, rubber truck bedding, and shellac. And I know that it sounds stupid, but shellac worked by far the best. And I gave these plenty of time, but the shellac really just did work the best. So I mixed shellac with some sandpaper sand, and I made a paste, and then I just spread it with a chip brush over the treadmill belt. While that was drying, I put together the cover for the motor, which I just made like a half cylinder for that. And with this cover over the motor, I'm obviously not going to be able to reach the motor anymore, so I made a hole and attached a switch so that I can turn the motor on and off from the outside. That is basically it. I just did some final sanding and I finished the sander with some shellac. Also, real quick, that super glue company, Starbun, that sent me a bunch of stuff a while back, they upped their discount from 10 to 15% off. So if you want some super glue or you just want to support me, you can use my code Josh Wright 15 to get 15% off your order. Here is what the final product looks like for the belt sander. And I'm really happy with how this turned out. I think the stand looks really cool. And the sandpaper thing with the shellac actually worked really well. I mean, it's staying on there super well. So it is on there good. So I will show you it sanding now. So there you go. Most of the grit stayed on pretty well. I will keep you up to date in the future videos on how well this is wearing. Because, I mean, honestly, I don't know how well it'll last over time. But as of right now, this seems to work pretty well. Here is what the block looks like after I was sanding on it. I wasn't trying to do anything in particular, just kind of shaping it. I rounded over like all the edges, as you can see. And I also just did some face sanding. And this grit is like the equivalent of like 80 or something. So it's not going to give it a smooth finish, obviously. But for shaping, which is what I usually use for the belt sander, this worked pretty well. And if you're wondering why I would even need such a large belt sander, well, I really don't. It's just kind of fun. And also, I thought it'd be good for like flattening things. Like if I was making chairs or stools or tables or anything with legs, this would be really good for like flattening the bottom so it sits on the ground straight or flat. So I have one of these older 1 2x4 stools I made. I think I made this one a year ago. And you can see it has a teeter to it. So it rocks back and forth. So I can use this belt sander and flatten the bottom so that it actually sits straight, or sits on the floor flat. Now, when I set it down, it's not rocking.